I received a listener question asking to explain my take on the void. And it is kind of a mysterious concept. And what makes it challenging is that it's hard for the human brain to put words to it. And words are symbolic references that pull up categories of thought forms, thought pieces, and concepts that we have stored in our internal databases. And we map a language to those concepts. And then when we want to share those concepts with other people, we share the word. But the problem is that sometimes people use the same words and they have different conceptual reference points in their database. And so another complication is that sometimes, such as in this case, talking about the void is really challenging because there's not a great way to explain it verbally. It is one of those mysteries of the universe type of experiences. So I will do my best. The void is what it sounds like, which is a place that is energetically inert. It is a transition zone, and you can kind of think about it in terms of an alleyway between two fractal spirals that are in parallel, running parallel to each other. But the people, the places, the things, the opportunities, the lessons between the left spiral and the right spiral are vastly different. There are these vexation points, is what I want to say. The second time this word came up for me today, or I guess that was last night when I was doing a channeled message for somebody for a tarot reading. So a vexation point is sort of like where two worlds overlap, kind of like a convergence point, but it's a little bit different, and that there's more distance. They don't actually overlap entirely. There's a little tiny bridge. And sometimes that bridge is talked about as the fold or the void. And the void has a couple of different meanings and nuances because the word doesn't correctly match with anything, and it's just an approximation. And so you'll hear the void being talked about in a variety of different forms because there is no English word for which to really capture the whole thing. But now back to the spirals. So there's this little alleyway between them of, it's not really empty space, but it's energetically devoid. It's inert, meaning you can't really catalyze anything there. You're not going to live there. It's like a graveyard. It's a transition zone where your body goes to decay and feed the mushrooms and the cycle of life, and your consciousness dissipates into the ether. And the graveyard is this collection of death and stillness. And sometimes there's not even decay. It's just almost a passage point. And what can happen is that if you're in a holographic universe, and I don't mean like the 80s sci-fi movies and 90s movies about holograms, and it's much more robust and complex than that, and much more seemingly solid, although we could argue even that's kind of an illusion. Now we know. So sometimes there's not even entropy, and it is a place where you just quickly pass through it's not a place where you can really do anything. You might not even encounter other travelers. I remember when I was in my apartment in Dallas, I had a multi-building complex. And there was one point that I was in the fold, is what I called it then. And I walked outside and it was so eerie. And there were cars there. There was evidence of life there, but it almost seemed like nobody was actually existing at that particular point in space and time. It was almost like this memory hologram that was frozen in time, and I was the only one that I saw. It was night, and it's possible that somebody saw me. It's possible that there were other people there. But if there were other people there, then it would have felt like they were also transitioning from one spiral to the other. And the way that our cognition is structured, to just be in emptiness is actually really hard on the psyche. And so what I have found is that when I have been to the end of the worlds several times through a variety of different ways, I've been doing this a really long time. In Earth years, if you were to look at my birth certificate, not so much, but my consciousness has been around through many failures and reboots of the world. Cataclysmic failures, species going extinct, ourselves blowing ourselves up, consciousness being backed up on an Iron Mountain type of computer, and so society reboots and then we have to do it all over again, and then it's contingent upon who the holders are of the society and of the technology and how evolved they are, and whether or not they're actually evolved enough to sidestep extinction. And so far the answer is no. I'm hoping that this iteration is a little different, but sometimes I look at the news and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, so the point is that I've had a couple of different experiences of this, and what I have observed is that when you get to the end of one world, there is a moment that, and it can happen so fast, on the order of a blink. Literally, it's called blinking. You can blink into another world. Or it can happen over the course of hours that you're caught in between the fold. And when that happens, there's almost this memory map that I believe is related to your working memory. And there's some function in our brain that maintains our world based on what we remember. And for each person, we have a set degradation of memories that allows for a delta of change to sort of shift. This is my theory as a neuroscientist who hasn't done hard science on this, but who has experienced it, just to be clear. It seems as though what happens is that you can only handle so much change at once, and everybody has an innate formula for this. And so as part of protecting the psyche mechanism, what seems to occur is that even when you're at the end of the world, your brain will keep populating the world and will maintain it based on your working memory, your memory of it. And then as time goes on and your memory degrades or changes, then you'll start to see things really shift. But I've experienced being at the end of a world and the road literally just repopulating like I'm in a video game, like rendering. Like I can see the edge of the road, the ditch completely is like hard edge disappearing and having to repopulate itself. And then I can only see maybe 200 feet in front of my car at night. There's nobody else around. The road looks really pixelated and weird and almost like translucent and see-through. And then all of a sudden, the road starts to render with me as I'm driving, and the scenery renders with me, but nothing's really changing because I'm not really familiar with this area and I'm out in the middle of nowhere. And then when society reboots, then it's like, okay, I see a car. Okay, I see a sign now. It's not just like an empty space. It hasn't always been like that, but I've experienced that several times. And similarly, when you are the only person in existence, even though you're walking around your apartment in Dallas or wherever you're at, your house, like it feels so eerie. Like the energy void is very, very distinct. And there's somebody else on my TikTok channel who's also a quantum traveler, who's had similar experiences, who has also been to the end of worlds and has been the only person there in existence in physical form with that higher level consciousness. So there are others out there as well. And it feels so odd because you're looking around at what could be almost like a Hollywood movie set. You know, like the light quality is strange. The energy is strange. Sometimes it's hard to breathe. Like it's hard to take a really deep breath. And other times you'll feel this is a very distinct experience. You'll feel like you're in the abyss and you have to be completely quiet and you have to lay down and not make a sound and keep your breath really, really shallow and let the clouds of entropy and chaos pass over you. And it's very intense feeling. It's almost like you can feel societies around you blowing themselves up, and you just have to let it pass over you like a cloud. Then other times when I've been in a void was when I had a death experience and I went beyond my body, beyond my identity, beyond the self, beyond the world, and I went to pure blackness, almost like in space, and I saw these little particles, almost like matter, and it was just like this moving cloud, dust cloud of matter that I could move with my consciousness and my intent and my creation energy. And I moved it in an infinity sign and directed the catalytic energy flow to the particles and created a world. And then other times during that creation process, I was worried that it was tampered with by some questionable motive sentient beings. I'll just put it like that. And so I went to a different void place and I manifested and I created a world where I just was the only conscious source energy. So it's like collapsing your consciousness all the way back to source and creating from that point of awareness versus the human point of awareness. And there's different levels of it. And there's different levels of awakening of that awareness. And most of the time in everyday life, you're not collapsed into source, right? You're not collapsed into that state of consciousness. And along the way, you have options for realities to build, to manifest, to create. And very often we have partners that create with us, and sometimes those partnerships are not in our highest interest. Other times, those partnerships are exploitive. And then other times, the partnerships need to be protected and preserved and hidden away until it's the right time to roll it out. And there's so many different iterations of this, right? And so what happens is when you start to awaken to your creation abilities, which is beyond just reality shifting, right? Now we're getting into manifesting, but we're not talking about manifesting a life that is another version of the life that you're living. We're talking about manifesting worlds. And when you start manifesting worlds, then you're going to have different fractal spiral arrangements that are going to be in your orbit. And to get from one to the other, you have to go through the void. And it's sort of like, you know those, I've never done this, but you know those like space tunnels where you put on a special flying suit and they have this like air tunnel that they blow you up, right? All of that force and all of that energy that pushes you up to give you that anti-gravity experience, that is what the energy capsule is like around a fractal. So you can imagine that the fractal of your life or your reality is wrapping around in that tube, and you as the flying person are sort of bouncing around and making decisions and attaching to different points in that spiral based on your awareness, your lessons, and things of that sort. And so that's what like micro shifting is, right? You're micro shifting in the same orientation, the same tunnel of options. But then when you connect to a different point in that spiral, you may have a bridge to a completely different spiral. You may have a convergence point where another spiral is for a moment in space and time overlapping completely and neatly. So all you have to do is just like walk into a new world. You don't even have to shift, you know? And so then all of that energy and momentum has a concentrated funnel. I don't know if this is exactly perfect, but this is how I'm visualizing right now. It has a funnel because it's a spiral, and that energy is congregated in that tunnel. And so that has a certain vibrancy and frequency, which may be very different from an adjacent spiral tunnel. And so that discrepancy as you shift from one tunnel to the other puts you in this void-like place, which I believe is actually an illusion of your mind based on human cognition. But I'm making this in October 2023, and I'm still figuring things out too. And I'm trying to conceptualize and synthesize what I've learned up until now, which has been a lot, but is still a working model and could still change. So that is, I think, why meditators, when they break past the ego, they break past the self, they talk about the nothingness, right? They talk about the void. It's because their point of awareness is stepping away from the spiral continuity and fractal orientation of their world and the person who exists in that world. And similarly, when you die and you are eliminated from a spiral, I think that's how it works. But, you know, with quantum immortality, and now people are talking about some other clone type of situations where it may not work this way, is my point. When perhaps you're on your last life and you expire, your consciousness, assuming that you have aggregated enough of it that you hold on to the awareness of who you are or some semblance of your memories, that it doesn't completely dissipate. For most people, I think it just dissipates. That's what the Oblivion series is all about, because I had that option of just disappearing into nothing several times, actually. And it's really uncomfortable when you're conscious. But I could see how if you were just unconscious, you would just like go to sleep and then just fade away. And it's that fading away, you fade away to the void unless you aggregate your energy. You aggregate your consciousness, almost like a little wisp ball of light. And then you can move through the void into potentially another place. Potentially. I'm not saying it works this way for you or would work this way for you, but this has been my experience. And I don't even know if it would work this way for me again. A lot has happened since then and continues to happen. So, thank you for such an insightful question, and we'll talk next time.